Hey there, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. Now that we have our transition in progress and the soil is exposed, let's talk about soil. What is it? Today we're going to talk about soil. We're going to talk mostly from the gardener's perspective. You can talk about soil in a number of ways. The engineer is going to talk about soil as a foundation for building on, and they're going to think about soil in a different way than, say, the farmer who's thinking about soil as a medium for growing in, or the geologist who's talking about soil in long-term cycles. So what is soil, and why is it important that we understand it? Well, first of all, soil is not dirt. Soil can make you dirty, but soil is not dirt. Dirt is something that you get on your hands. It's soil and contaminants and charcoal dust and phlegm that's floating around in the air, and it's out of place, okay? Soil is in place. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about gardening is soil. We don't garden in dirt, so to speak. And that's often a sign that you haven't studied up much about soil when you call it dirt. When we're talking about soil, we're generally talking about 45% minerals. We're talking about 25% air, 25% water, and 5% organic material like grass and stuff that's fallen down, leaves, things that are rotting on the top. That's typically the makeup of most soil. Now, soils vary from place to place. Obviously, there are different types and different kinds of elements, but that's usually what good soil is, 45% minerals. And that means sand, silt, or clay, sand being the largest particle, silt being kind of in between, clay being very small. And all of these different minerals have different properties. And if you have a balanced mix of sand, silt, and clay in your soil, you're going to have what's called loam, and that's going to be a very good balanced soil. My soil in my area is largely made up of very dense black gumbo clay. It's a very dense soil, and it holds water really well, but it doesn't hold much air. If you have a sandy soil, it doesn't hold water very well at all, but it does hold a lot of air. And so we have to amend our soils if we're going to grow things in them optimally. And well, that's what we do as gardeners, is we know what our soil is, so we know how to take care of our soil, amend it, and maintain it. Now, the minerals in the soil are very important. A lot of gardeners swear by the old organic methods. The Rodale method is just throw all the organic material you can into a garden. And some people just garden in pure organic material, in compost. You can do that. The problem with that is that your plants need the minerals that are actually in the ground. They need that calcium, they need that magnesium, they need all that stuff that's found in the rock stuff. That's what minerals are. Pulverized rock, ground up rock. And over time, the rock down in that makes up our soil has been pulverized, and there's an exchange that goes on between the roots of the plants and those minerals. Those minerals have literally, they can transfer, I believe it's called a cation exchange, but there's a way that they can transfer nutrition your plants need to the plants. And so if you just have organic material, sometimes you can be lacking in some of the things your plants really need. And so vegetables that we grow in non-mineralized soils tend to have less flavor and less nutrition. So when you're thinking about soil and that water in the soil and the air in the soil, that's why we go for loose soil that has a good tilth. We add organic material to it and think that, well, that's going to help our tilth. Maybe it does a little bit, especially in a heavy clay like this, but what you're also looking for is a balance between sand, clay, and what's the other one? Silt. And that will help your soil to maintain a natural looseness, a natural balance of all those air pockets and water pockets. And the water is very important because the life in the soil, we're going to talk about the soil web in just a moment, the life in the soil breaks up and is literally able to feed on the minerals and on the organic material and make the nutrition that is make nutrition available to your plants in those water pockets. And so it's all very important. So good soil, good healthy soil does have a lot of minerals in it. Sometimes the soil in your particular area might pose challenges to your gardening efforts. For example, I've just mentioned I have clay here. Most of the soil in my area is real dense clay, and it's very difficult to garden unless the conditions are just right. And then you can actually cut it and work it and till it, but normally it doesn't drain well. So that's why I've chosen to do raised beds. I can bring soil in here and build soil here and keep my soil maintained on top of the clay. And all that time, what's underneath my raised bed will be amended, and that clay will slowly begin to loosen up. And so these raised bed borders are only about 8 inches tall, and so that's 8 inches of soil on top of about 2 inches of topsoil that used to be my lawn. And then beneath that, we've got hard clay. So now though, after 7 years, my gardens on top of the soil have actually amended and worked into the clay layer. And so when I dig down deep enough, I can pull up clay, and it's nice and loose clay. And so every now and then it's good to actually turn the soil over and get some of that clay up into my growing area, and that provides minerals for the garden. For example, this stuff right here, this is mostly peat moss, because most of this is old recycled potting mix. Peat moss doesn't have much nutritional value, if any. You have to get some clay in there, you have to get some sand and some silt in there. So this is the least healthy portion of my raised beds for now, but I'll be working on it, and I'll be bringing some mineralization to this soil, and I'll be amending it. And this is the portion of my raised bed that I actually will turn. This has been here for a year, so we're gonna dig down here and look and see what it looks like then at the clay layer. But next to it, all the rest of my raised beds have been, over the 7 years that I've had these beds in, occasionally been turned and occasionally had some clays and silts brought up from down below, and that's been real healthy for the soil. Just gonna dig a hole. And you can see all that came out because that's old potting mix. You can see the perlite and vermiculite in there. But as I get to the bottom of my garden, I'm seeing some clay. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's hard clay right there. That used to be my lawn. There's even a little bit of sand in there. All right, so here's the hole, and you can see on the top, it's just peat moss. It's potting mix. Different things that came out of pots. A lot of organic matter there, a whole lot of it. But when I get down to my clay layer here, and I pull out a chunk of it, you can see it's nice and loose now. It's been interacting with the life in the soil. It's been broken up a bit. Now if I go further down, I do get into some harder clay, and there happens to be some sand in this area as well. And here's what the harder clay looks like. You know, it's so hard you can put your fingerprint in it, but this will begin to break up over time as I properly mineralize this soil. It's not so much the organic material, it's the mineralization that comes from working the garden and from tending the garden, amending the garden properly with the right minerals. So also what helps break up some of this is the life in the soil. Another healthy component of good soil is the soil food web. If you don't have life in your soil, then your soil is not going to give up the nutrients that it has stored in there. The potential of the soil is not available. But almost every soil has life in it. You've got the major contributors to, at least for the perspective of gardening, is that you've got bacteria in the soil. You have fungus in the soil. You have nematodes in the soil. You have protozoans in the soil. These are all the microscopic life forms that really are the primary reason organic matter can break down, and the nutrition that's stored in those things can be made available to your plants. The bacteria especially, they actually literally can feed on minerals. They can actually feed on all the organic material in your soil, and what they do is they release the nutrients, the various elements your plant need, and in the water that's in the soil, that stuff becomes part of the solution down there, and your plant roots can literally mine those nutrients. And so there's a symbiotic relationship in the soil between everything that lives in it. That's why you need air in there, that's why you need water, that's why it needs to be not highly compact. So these organisms all live down in that soil and make things available to your plants. They also, you also have in your soil macroorganisms like earthworms and things you can actually see, creatures that burrow. And these are the kind of animals that live in your soil that aerate your soil and also help to break down. So the primary mover, though, is the bacteria and the fungal web. They break down the organic material that you add to your soil. You're not feeding your plants when you put compost in your soil. You're feeding the bacteria and the fungi down there, and those release what's in the compost. Those turn the compost into humus and break it down even further and release the nutrition into your soil. So in this bed I'm sitting on right here, I put a bunch of logs on the bottom of it about 1.5 years ago when I made this new bed. Let's take a look and see what the bacteria have done to those logs. Let's see if we can find any fungal life down there and see what it looks like after 1.5 years. Again, this is a garden bed that was made largely of recycled potting soil and other things that I had lying around. But in the bottom of this bed, I put some wood. And I see I've reached the bottom because I'm finding some sand there. And I'm not finding much of the wood down there. There's some. Let's see what we got here. Let's see what we can find. I actually did put some sand in here to give it some mineral content. So I can see that sand is pretty consistent throughout. And that's good. This has been a good performing bed. So you can see, I hope, that the bacteria and the fungus have made what was very hard wood very brittle and light. There's been a whole lot of removal of material in here, and just the harder stuff is left behind. You can see here, this is a strand of fungi. That's probably mycorrhizal fungi right there, and that's working on this piece of wood. This piece of wood is still pretty intensely solid, but it's a lot lighter than it was. So a lot of the water content has gone out, and yeah, there's a lot of good stuff going on down here. And here's one of our friends here. That's one of our macroorganisms working down here in the soil. So this appears to be getting healthier as that organic material that's in here continues to be broken down by the life in the soil, and this just needs to have its mineralization cared for. Make sure that we have good mineralization in here. Look at that. That's what you want to see in your soil. One way you can be real accurate in knowing what your soil contains is to have a soil test. And if you want to work on your mineralization, that's the best way. So Samuel and I have gone through the garden and sampled our garden. We sent everything off to a laboratory. We're using Logan Labs. Steve Solomon recommends that in his book, The Intelligent Gardener. And he talks all about mineralization. So we'll get our results back and we'll know exactly what we need to do to our garden. There is another way that you can impact your mineralization that's not quite as accurate. You can read your plants, and your plants will tell you what they're lacking, and it's a little more difficult. But you can go and add minerals to your soil in the form of amendments like azomite. Every now and then I'll come and I'll just dust some azomite over my entire garden beds. That's not the accurate way, but it is a way to add those micronutrients, those micro minerals, and all the minerals that your plants need. But it's not the best way. It's just kind of a stopgap measure. You know, you throw stuff out there and you hope for the best, but it's better than not having minerals at all. This is compost. This is the compost that I've made, I guess since last spring up until now, and I've used some of it already. Organic material. Now, in the old days of organic gardening, the old Rodale method and some of the methods that are in use today, everyone just wants to grow in pure compost, straight compost, or in wood chips and just organic material all by itself. Well, you know, I mean, you can grow that way, and that's good. If you like that, man, go for it. More power to you. I love compost. But the purpose of organic material in the garden is multifold. And the problem that gardeners these days have is that we think we need that more is best. But in reality, like I said, in a soil composition, in good, healthy soil, organic material only makes up 5% of the mass of the soil. And that's all you need. So when I use my compost, I just put about a 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch layer over the top of my beds, and that's it for each growing season. And if you take the total mass of the garden soil, compared to the little bit of compost I put on the top, that's about 5%. My soil test will actually tell me how much it is when it gets back. But the purpose of organic material in the soil is also tied to the kind of soil you have. If you have a real sandy soil and it doesn't retain water, organic material retains water really, really well. And so you could put a lot of that organic material in there and that will help to retain water. If you have a clay soil that doesn't have a lot of air in it and you work in some organic material, that organic material tends to also retain air, and that's what that bacteria and fungal life need down there. They need air. They can help your soil be more well draining. But also the organic material you put in your soil feeds the bacteria in the soil, and that bacteria will eat this stuff. It's not your plants this is not fertilizer. Your plants are not eating the compost. The bacteria and fungal life, the nematodes, the earthworms, the protozoans, all that life in the soil feeds on this and converts it to a form of nutrition that the plants can actually use. And the roots can harvest that from the water solution that's in the soil that contains all the byproducts of that bacterial breakdown, that fungal breakdown. So compost and organic material in your soil is helpful, but you don't need as much as most gardeners have been taught to believe. You just need about 5% total. So one way that you can see what your soil is made of is kind of the old school, grade school type experiment. So Sam's going to fill this jar about halfway. We're going to dig down and get a good sample of our soil. So go ahead and get in there and try to avoid like all the, yeah, let's get kind of the middle part of the soil. That's good. Awesome. And so this will tell us when we stir it all up with a bunch of water and wait for it to settle out, we'll see different strata, we hope. And then we're going to wait for it to settle out. Okay, so I'm going to use this potato masher, much to my wife's horror, I'm sure. And I'm just going to smash up this stuff in here and stir it around, make sure we get everything into mostly sediment form. When I worked at the Houston Museum of Natural Science, we built a sedimentation tank to show how the oceans fill up in different layers, and it was quite interesting. We are pretty much doing the same thing here. We're going to stir this around and then let it settle out. My expectation is that the heavier and larger particles will settle out first to the bottom, and the smaller particles will land on top of that, and then we'll have organic material floating at the top. So we're just going to set that right there. What we can see in here is what appears to be clay and what appears to be more of a sandy clay, and then above that we've got a dark layer of suspended silt. That's what that appears to be. Now I could be totally wrong, but you can see that our clay is made up of distinct materials, and that's what this little experiment shows. We have different layers of distinct material, and well, I don't know if they're in balance. And then above it, of course, we've got the water and the organic material. But yeah, it's interesting to see what you have in your soil by doing this little test. So you really want to know what's in your soil. And whether you do that with a simple elementary school sediment test in a jar with some clay and some water, or whether you just watch your plants and see what they're telling you they're lacking, or the best method of all, send off for a soil test and find out for sure. You want to know what's in your soil so you can amend it properly, you can get maximum harvests, maximum nutrition, and you can really get your soil in good shape. Hey, thanks for joining me on Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. I hope you enjoy our channel. Please share our videos, and if you like them, subscribe. We'll talk to you next time. Happy gardening to you. Bye-bye.